would like to thank Dr. Dhami, Dr. Namta, Dr. Vinod for giving me opportunity to share some of my experience in managing post-LASIK ectasia. Post-LASIK ectasia, I would put it's a basically monster which we met like rarely, not that frequently, but once it's there, it's going to create problem and we need some kind of protection for that. Post-LASIK ectasia, it's very difficult to define, but it's increasing myopia, increase in myopic astigmatism, loss of uncorrected visual acuity and loss of best corrected visual acuity. They may be there, they may not be there. That's not the essential part basically, because most of the times it starts from the periphery. Keratometric steepening, again superior and inferior, sometimes central, paracentral, and topographic evidence of asymmetric inferior steepening. So all these characters, they are characteristics of ectasia. If you look at the epidemiology of post-LASIK ectasia, it has been found that 0.2 to 0.06%, 0.02 to 0.06% is the prevalence rate. But it has been found that most of the ectasia cases, they occur following LASIK rather than PRK. And in so many years of years of managing these cases, I have not seen any single case of post-LASIK ectasia following PRK. Median time in one study was 13 months, but it can be longer also. And if you look at the some of the risk factors following SMILE, the study is by Dr. Sheetal Barar. We heard her in the previous talk. They have done this study that 10 eyes of 6,619 patients, they developed ectasia. So the incidence they determined was 0.15%. But it was interesting to note that if you look at normal topography, only 2 patients they developed. So the incidence was much low. And those patients who have borderline topography, the incidence was much more. If you have a borderline topography and if you do SMILE alone, they found that it was the risk was like 8 in 999 cases who had borderline topography, so 0.8%. But if you perform SMILE extra in these cases, then the incidence was almost nil. So this is a very good study, and we had to see to it that if we have a like borderline topography, then we may prefer SMILE extra. These are the risk factors for post-LASIK ectasia: abnormal preoperative topography, low residual stromal bed, young age, low preoperative corneal thickness, and high myopia. We have several measures to prevent the post-LASIK ectasia in preoperative workup in surgical planning, and 2 of these factors, that residual stromal bed should be kept more than 300 micron. Earlier it was used to be 250 microns, and then the percentage of tissue altered, again 0.4 or less. So all these measures, they can be taken before we plan the surgery. But we need to understand that these numbers, they are not the discrete variables or absolute numbers. You cannot be in LASIK planning be 100% sure that I am keeping 300 micron residual bed, so the incidence is going to be 0. No, they are continuous variables, just like birth weight of a child. We normally say that the birth weight is 2.5 kg, but it may not be 2.5 kg, it may be more or less. So the same thing is true, that we have to understand and make the patient also understand some of these issues, because these are not absolute, nothing is absolute as far as refractive surgery is concerned. Again, this kind of scoring systems, again they can enhance a little bit of safety, but again they are not absolute. Introduction of corneal epithelial thickness measurements in like preoperative screening, again is useful, as we discussed. Dr. Sahil will talk about it. So it's useful, but again they will reduce the risk. Same thing is true for the corneal biomechanics. Various indices have been developed. Again, these will help to further reduce the incidence of post-LASIK ectasia. Once we go to the topographic patterns, most of the times we get cracked pattern or PMD appearance, and asymmetric bow tie is another pattern. But most of the patients whom we suspect just because they have some alteration in the vision, and if you do topography in these patients, they have inferior steepening. In this study, they have found 14%, but I have found much more incidence of inferior steepening in my cases. And superior steepening, of course, is rare, and that is something which is least common of these things. Once we have post-LASIK ectasia, it is important to look for the progression, whether it is progressing or not, because sometimes it remains static, and even over a period of time it may get even better also. So to define progression, we need to have consistent change over time and above the normal variability of the testing item in two of these parameters: steepening of the anterior corneal surface, steepening of the posterior corneal surface, thinning or an increase in the rate of the corneal thickness change from periphery to thinness. Now, change in uncorrected visual acuity or best corrected visual acuity is not necessary, as we were talking about the definition also. For younger patients, we need to repeat the topography at shorter intervals, and it should be done preferably on the same machine so that we don't have variations because of the machine. This is one patient who came to us. He had initial stage of progression. We advised him that we will keep you follow up, or you come early and we'll do, if necessary, CXL. So he didn't came, and again you see the progression, and when there was progression, we did that. In post-LASIK ectasia, pregnancy is one major risk which has been clearly identified, and there are several studies which have documented it, and it's seen that it's the hormonal changes which affects the corneal biomechanical stability, and that may trigger the ectasia. In one of the case reports in the literature, the patient was found to have ectasia in 36 weeks of pregnancy. And this patient underwent collagen cross-linking, and the progression stopped. But when the patient had second pregnancy, she got in the other eye. They did cross-linking, but it didn't stop. So it's a hormonal influence which changes the biomechanical strength of the cornea, and we get it. As we were talking about the post-smile ectasia, yes, it's there. Of around 64 eyes which I have seen with the post-refractive surgery ectasia, around 8 eyes are following post-smile ectasia. Now, this is a young doctor who underwent smile 2 years back, and his numbers were around 6 diopters. His topography was absolutely normal, but again he got inferior steepening. So he is still under observation whether it progresses fast or not. Regarding the management, we have several options, but contact lenses remain one of the most preferred modality for me, and we had been using all type of contact lenses, Rose-K, even Kerasoft lenses also are useful, those who do not tolerate RGP lenses. But this is the mini scleral contact lenses which are extremely used for these patients. Collagen cross-linking, if the progression is identified, we need to perform this. We can use either Destin protocol or accelerated, and sometimes we have to we have to prevent damage to the limbal stem cells. We can always put some shield on the limbus. This is one patient who underwent post-LASIK ectasia CXL treatment, and after 2 years of treatment, again the topography is better, and it's stable, and he's using scleral contact lenses. Intex can be used for post-LASIK ectasia. This is one report where they have used. I know so many surgeons they might have used, but I have not used Intex for post-LASIK ectasia, but they can be used if it is a central and if it is the significant astigmatism in that area. Cairns is a better option in expert hands, and Dr. Susan Jacob, she has done a lot of work in this area. I find two major advantages of Cairns. One is it's cost effective as compared to the Intex. The second thing is that it can be customized. You can have the broader segment where you need more of steepening, and you can have narrower where you need less steepening. So you can customize your segment to treat these patients. So this is very useful procedure. Of course, pentating keratoplasty and lamellar keratoplasty, these are the last resorts for the patients who have extreme ectasia and they are not helped by these modalities. In the end, I would like to say that, of course, prevention is better than cure, and meticulous pre-operative evaluation screening is very good. Artificial intelligence and use of guidelines based on population-based data can be helpful. And we can always customize the procedure according to the patient's age or pre-operative topography findings, so that in case we need to go for surface ablation, we can go for that, or we need smile or smile extra, so we can do that. But in case a patient doesn't fit there, or we want to have alternatives, we definitely can always surrender, and we can go to the alternative procedures like phakic IOLs, multifocal IOLs, and like that. In the end, if even if we meet this monster, it's not we should not get demotivated, because corneal ectasia remains a non-risk of the laser vision correction, and if it occurs, it does not necessarily mean that the patient was poor candidate for surgery and the surgery was contraindicated, or there was some violation of the standard of care. This is from American Society of Cataract and Refractive Surgery. So thank you very much for patient hearing, and I wish all good luck for my fellows not to meet with this monster again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. That indeed was a very enlightening talk. I request Dr. Rajesh Sinha to give the memento to Dr.